Hey y'all, it's Olivia. I am here today to launch a new series that I am tentatively calling Read This, Play That. Read This, Play That, looking at pairing together a book and probably an indie video game and discussing the two together. It's kind of like a wine and cheese pairing event, except a little bit classier because what's as high class like video games? If you're familiar with the podcast that I co-host, No Cartridge, we have a series that's somewhat related to this called GG No Reread. And that is a more in-depth, like hour-long discussion of like a book together with video games. Like we've talked about Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones with Kraven Manor. We've talked about Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick with Pokemon. We have talked about A Constant Hum together with Firewatch. So those aren't all indie video games, but I think that for this series that I will try to be supporting indie video game artists because like you're probably familiar with indie book publishing, there's not a lot of money in the indie arts, but I think that we should support those artists because honestly, they're the games that I love to play the most. So today we will be talking about Cultish by Amanda Montell together with Sagebrush. So today we will be talking about Cultish by Amanda Montell together with Sagebrush, which was developed by Redact Games. I played Sagebrush on the Switch, but it's also available on Xbox One, PS4, Steam, and itch for the PC. If you're gonna play it on anywhere, I would recommend playing your indie video games on itch because whenever you buy on itch, more of the money goes to the creators rather than if you buy things on Steam and the money is just being given to Valve for what purposes? Bigger monopoly share. But let's get into Cultish. Cultish is a 2021 nonfiction release by Amanda Montell that is looking at the language behind fanaticism. So it's looking at the language of the cults that you would imagine. So like Jonestown, Scientology, like true, honest to God cults, as well as cultish things like Peloton and QAnon and MLMs like not necessarily Tupperware, it's a little bit old school, but things like the LuLaRoe leggings and any of like the essential oils ones. You know, you're familiar with them. If you have stayed on Facebook since high school, you will have gotten friend requests from the girls that you were in class with that are now mompreneurs and hashtag girl bosses. So it looks at the language of inclusion and us and them binaries, as well as critical thought ending phrases like trust the process and anything that just gets you to agree with this like understood process and like leads you to not question anything. So that even goes into like MLMs that they will like if you're like, okay, I'm trying to be you know, a hashtag girl boss and be part of this MLM, but I'm not doing very well, then like you'll get messages from the other people like, you must have not have really wanted it, and you're just not trying hard enough. You're not fully trusting the process. If you trusted the process, then it would work for you too. And I think that what's so interesting about this like cultish language is that it's almost exclusively like an American phenomenon, partially because of, I mean, in large part due to our society that really privileges individualism above all things. Ironically, this emphasis on individualism is what makes capitalism unquestioned in our society, where people have been exploited from their labor, that they don't have health care, that they have been doing things that they have not wanted to do since they started school at like 5 or 6 up through adulthood, just so that they can eat and survive. And so whenever you're exploited from your labor in that way, it's like you do want to look for alternatives. Like, it doesn't make sense. And so people look for community, and can easily get sucked into communities that aren't equal, because we still want that safety net. And so sometimes, like, if there's a people that tell you that they know, and that they have the answers, your gut reaction is you want to believe them. And so it's also, I thought that this book did a good job of seeing the human side of things and not just being like, oh, those people are susceptible to cults, but I would never be susceptible to language like that. Whereas we all do buy into stuff that's like not necessarily full-blown cults, but stuff that that we can be influenced by on Instagram, influencer language, and wanting to make the best of our time on earth and to believe that there are answers. It also talked too about like that a lot of times people like millennials are getting pulled into these cults because organized religion is kind of like tapering off with them, but they need something to replace that in their life, that they still need those answers. So it was a very empathetic look, I think, at why people might be driven to be pulled into cults, and it wasn't so exclusionary that it was looking down on these people, but just like it resisted that us versus them binary language that help cults form by saying, you know, like, these are people in our society too, and in some ways we have failed them as a society because of the way that we have been. I mean, I think that I'm putting a little bit more of the emphasis on capitalism and that we have been alienated through capitalism into not having a sense of community that's more healthy. But Cultish, check it out if you're interested in both full-blown cults, but like also just like linguistic information. As I mentioned, the game that I want to be talking about today is Sagebrush, developed by Redact Games. Sagebrush follows a woman who is learning about the Perfect Heaven cult, which was a cult that is known to have committed a mass suicide in 1993. This woman is going back to the compound where this cult existed at the Black Sage Ranch in Albuquerque, and it follows this woman as she's kind of going through a sequential story of finding out what's going to happen. So this game, the gameplay is like kind of like a walking simulator. At times there's little puzzles to figure out, but this woman is going through the story, kind of meeting the people involved, then going through like the different locations that there are, you know, like the barn, the church, the living compounds, the mess hall. It has a creepy tone throughout the game, and I wasn't sure if it was like a horror game whenever I was playing it. I will say, like, if you are someone who's easily scared by horror games, that there's no jump scares or anything in the game. It is tense because it's about a suicide cult, and therefore, you know, there's frightening imagery at times, but there's never going to be anything that that's kind of like the caveat that I want whenever I'm playing a horror game, is I don't want any jump scares. I played this game on Switch, thankfully, because if I'd been playing on my PC with my headset on, that's kind of whenever I get overwhelmed by tense games. But this game is really cool. It has a very like pixelated, stylized look to it, not super realistic, which I actually prefer. Whenever there is a super realistic environment, I find that I feel like a toy in the environment, and that you're seeing all the details that there are, which can never be true to life. Whenever it's pixelated and stylized, I can actually get more immersed in the game because my mind has room to imagine the rest. This game does a good job of really being empathetic towards the people that are in this cult, similar to how Cultish was, that it doesn't revel in the fact that these this cult existed. It's looking more at the relationships and a real like sadness runs throughout it, of course. It has like an overall melancholy tone to it. There is a leader of this cult, Father James, who believes that he was visited by angels and like honestly has this message that he wants to share with the world. So there's a sadness there that this man like truly believes that. Obviously, you should not be doing all these things and still have a cult, even if you believe that you've been visited by angels. There is some sensitive topics in this as far as sexual relationships that are forced with Father James as like part of their belief system. But like I said, this game is going from the beginning where you're like walking through the gates as like you're following kind of like this journalistic look at what happened up until the mass suicide happens, which you know that going into the game that's going to happen. So it's like, it's about like an hour, 2 hour long walking simulator type game. So it's really, I think, a good start for people who maybe don't play a lot of video games, because it is similar to the narrative of a book in that way. So if you're new to video games and you like tense, spooky things in books, and I would say definitely check this out. I played it a couple of years ago. I just like found it on a Switch sale. This game's about like $5 and like it frequently goes on sale. So I would, and it's available wherever you play video games. So definitely check it out if it sounds interesting to you. Let me know if you've played any other cult video games, if you've read any other culty books. It is something that I'm generally very interested in. So I would love to hear more and have more recommendations, especially that I don't think I've played any other video games with a cult in it. I don't think. But I'm also very sensitive to horror video games, surprisingly, since I watch a ton of horror movies without any problem and I read a ton of horror books without any problem. But something about being fully immersed with the sound with headphones on is just a little too much, and like having that subjectivity in the game is a little bit too much. But Sagebrush is not a horror game, so rest assured you will be okay. You will make it through. But let me know what you think about this new series. If there's any games topics that you would really like me to pair together and talk about together. I think that the through line here is really that these are both about cults, but very empathetic and not super like sensationalizing the cults or like dehumanizing the people that are in them. Being as objective as you can about something that's so personal. So let me know what you think, and I will talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye.